going to talk about Meteor. And so first of all, how many people here have heard about Meteor before? How many have heard but not because of me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So first of all, let me try something. So I'm going to try using my iPhone as a remote. I'm not sure if it's working or not. Anyway.
Is it out of sync?
Yeah. So I need to read things, sorry. Got a QR code. I have a musical background.
Everything works until you're in front of a room full of people.
Yeah, okay, so no iPhone remote. Anyway.
That's attractive in market. Yeah, I saw that.
So yeah, this presentation is going to be like in two parts. The first part is going to be an overview of Meteor, and the second part is going to be a short tutorial about how to actually build a Meteor app. So I'm not sure how much time we'll actually have for that second part, but if I have to stop short tonight, it's okay because I'll just upload the slides and you guys can just check them out online. So let's get started. So first of all, what's Meteor? So Meteor is a JavaScript framework. And when you hear the words JavaScript framework, you usually think about things like jQuery, Backbone, maybe Angular, Ember, there's a lot of them. And all of these are client-side JavaScript frameworks. So typically you would use them with a Ruby on Rails app on the backend or a PHP app. And the JavaScript part is just on the client, which is the browser. And now there's also JavaScript on the server, though, with Node. And Node has its own frameworks, so Express, for example, is one. But even when you're using a Node framework on the server and a JavaScript framework on the client, those are still two different things, right? So you would have Express on the server and Angular on the client. So the big innovation of Meteor is that you have Meteor on both sides. So Meteor has a server-side component that runs on Node and a client-side component that runs in the browser. So this is what we call full-stack JavaScript, and it's kind of like the holy grail of web development to have only one language and one environment for your whole app. So that's what Meteor is trying to do. So there's three important Meteor principles that I want to talk about that makes the framework special. And the first one is what the Meteor guys call the data on the wire. And what that means is, you know, for a typical Ruby on Rails app, for example, on each request, the server will send over HTML, CSS, JavaScript, basically sending the templates over and over. Meteor doesn't work like this. Although you do send all this stuff on the first request, all subsequent requests will only send data, for example, JSON data. So this makes for a much faster apps because you don't need to be sending HTML and all that heavy stuff every single time. The second principle is database everywhere. And what that means is that, so on a traditional app, you have a database on the server, for example, MongoDB. But what Meteor does is take that database, or maybe a subset of that database, and replicate it on the client. What this does is it makes it much faster for your app to access data because it's sitting in memory in the browser. So the app doesn't need to do a full round trip to the server, to the database, and then back to the client. And the third principle is reactivity. And what that means is that whenever a piece of data will change in the database on the server, not only will that change be reflected automatically on the client in the in-memory database, but also on the client in the user interface. And all this happens automatically and in real time. So it makes for a very powerful and very fast development workflow and user experience where as soon as something changes, like a piece of data changes, it changes in the UI as well. don't need to write callbacks or all that. Two more cool things that Meteor does. First of all, everything is included automatically. So as soon as you put an HTML file, CSS, JavaScript file in your repo, Meteor is going to detect it and include it in your app. You don't need to link it up with a script tag or a link tag. As well as hot code reload. And hot code reload means that Meteor will watch your local directory for changes to any file and refresh the browser anytime that happens. So the way I see it, Meteor is kind of taking all these pieces of technology that used to exist but weren't necessarily working together and all puts them in a single seamless package. So I don't want to just keep showcasing feature independently. What I want to do tonight is actually use all these features to build something. And here's what I want to build. So who knows Dribbble, the website? So for those who don't know, Dribbble is it's been called the GitHub for designers. It's basically where designers go to showcase their work. And the way it works is you post an image, which Dribbble calls a shot, because it's themed, there's a basketball theme going on. And shots can be commented on, voted on, and so on. And because of that, there's a popular page that recaps the 12 most popular shots of the moment. So this is the Dribbble popular page, and what we're going to do is build a grid of that homepage. So a grid of Dribbble is a Gribble, which is the name of our app. And this is what it's going to look like. So you can see each column will represent 1 hour of the homepage, so a snapshot of 1 hour. And the rows here are the positions of each image on the homepage. And the way we're going to build it is pretty simple. Every hour, we're going to query the Dribbble API, get some JSON from that, put that JSON in our Meteor database, so MongoDB. And whenever someone hits the site, we'll just get that information back and display it in a grid. So let's get started. So first of all, this is what the finished product will look like. So you can see here that, for example, this image started out in 8th position and then climbed to 7, 6, then back to 7, before dropping off the homepage. So this way it's like a neat way to track the evolution of the homepage over time. And by the way, if you have any question at any point, feel free to raise your hand and let me know. So the first step is going to be the setup. So in this case, I'm already set up, but it's a pretty important step if you're following along at home. So let's get through it. To install Meteor, there's actually only one command. You just copy-paste that in your terminal, and that will not only install Meteor, but actually install the whole Meteor stack, including Node, MongoDB, and all the Meteor files. And this is completely packaged and independent of your existing Node or existing MongoDB installs, so it's pretty convenient. Once you have the Meteor command line utility, you can then create an app with Meteor create plus the name of your app. And once that's done, you can go in the directory and run your app with the Meteor command. So let's see what that gives us. Okay, so this is the default placeholder Meteor app, just a hello world. It doesn't do anything, but it's actually a Meteor app. So now let's start actually building our Dribbble app. So the first thing I'll do is just get rid of the hello world stuff, and then I'll create 3 directories: client, server, and collections. And finally, I'll take an existing style sheet that I prepared and paste it in the client directory. So let's see. Let's run that. you'll notice the screen instantly turned black, and that's because the style.css file includes a black background on the body tag. And right now there's actually no like HTML or JavaScript or anything, any kind of code in my app, but since Meteor picks up style sheets automatically, it's already picking it up and putting it in action. And before going on, I just want to speak briefly about those 3 directories. So as you might imagine, client will contain all our client code. So anything you put in there is only loaded and only executed on the client. Same thing with server. Anything you put in server is only loaded and executed on the server. That code never gets sent to the client. And finally, collections. So collections is neither the client or the server directory. So it actually gets run on both environments.
Is this by convention, or do you have to?
So client and server are conventions, and any other directory name will get run in both environments. And that's actually pretty useful, as we'll soon see, because it means you can share code between both environments, and you don't need to rewrite stuff as much. So, I mean, we have a working Meteor app, even though it's just a black screen, but now we can actually make it do something. Okay, so the first step in like our process is collecting the data. So querying Dribble, getting some JSON stuff, and putting it in our database for later use. So in order to do this, we need to create a place where we can put that data, right? So in Meteor, that's called a collection. And if you're used to MySQL, for example, it's pretty much like a MySQL table. It's basically just a place where you put objects of similar type. So we'll create a new snapshots.js file in the collections directory with that code, and we'll run the app. So now I'll go to my app, and I'll go to my browser console here to make sure that the collection has been created. So if I type snapshots.find.fetch, you can see that it gives me all this array of objects, and that's because I've already preloaded data in the database. Obviously, if you hadn't preloaded, it would be empty, but you can already see that it's finding that collection, so it's working. And by the way, at that point, the real-time and reactive aspect of Meteor is already working. So if you had 2 browser windows or 2 clients and you added items to the collection, even though there's no other code besides that line of code, it will already work. It would already,
Does the database schema define the structure of the object returned by the fetch function?
No, it's MongoDB, so there's no real schema.
Right. I don't know that much about Mongo.
Basically, you can put whatever you want, so it's up to the app to make sure you don't mess up too much the schema.
From what I saw with Meteor is like, for example, you have many browsers, not many browsers, many tabs. They subscribe to the same session, they are updated at the same time, but does it happen also with different sessions? Can it happen? You can subscribe, for example.
Yeah, so it happens across tabs, across browsers, across clients. Everybody.
What I mean is, for example, you have user A and user B, and they want to subscribe to the same, let's say, session. So only user A and B see the updates, but the user C, who is not in the same session, does not see.
Oh, you can do that.
You
can. Okay, so we have a collection. So now we need to put stuff in it, right? So to do that, we'll add the Meteor HTTP package. So Meteor has a very simple package management system, which is going to get better soon. So once we've added the HTTP package with Meteor add HTTP, this gives us the http.get function, just a regular HTTP query function, which means we can query the Dribble API, gets some JSON in return and put that JSON in our collection. So that's what snapshots.insert result does. And we want to execute that every hour. So we can do that easily with a set interval. Every 3,600,000 seconds will trigger, or milliseconds actually, will trigger that function. So now we just need to wait 12 hours. No, okay, we're not going to wait 12 hours. What we can do, so remember that all this code so far is on the server. But Meteor has a very convenient feature called Meteor Methods, and those methods act as kind of as a remote control, and they let you execute or call a server-side function from the client. So this is how you define it, Meteor Methods, and I'm going to call my client-side function query from client, and I'm just going to trigger the query API function. So we can test that right away. If I go back to my console, if I do a count here, I can see I have 24 items. Once I call my function, I still have 24. Okay, I should have 25. Oh, that's because I don't have any internet, actually. Remind me to make sure there's internet next time I give this talk. So yeah, it can't get the data from Dribble. But anyway, you get the idea. So the reason I wanted to stop on this is because it's a good illustration of how Meteor makes it easy for the client and the server to interact. There's lots of ways to do that. Okay, so we now have data in our database, so we can start working on how to display it. Okay, so I've already done this, but if you wanted to preload the data, you could just use the same insert function we've been using. Just put it in a loop, and you can execute all this from the browser console. So obviously it's not very secure, but we'll see more about that soon. Okay, so now for the fun part, setting up our templates to display the content. So this main.html file acts as the main template that's going to hold your whole app. So it's kind of a convention to call it main.html. And you can just put your head, your body, and we're going to include a grid template. So the weird looking thing here is handlebars code, which is a very, very simple templating language. So we're just including a grid template, which obviously doesn't exist yet, but we're going to create it. So the grid template will have a loop on an object called snapshots, and then for each snapshot, show the timestamp. So the way I'm doing things here is I'm building the HTML first, which obviously won't really work because the JavaScript objects don't exist. And then in the second layer, I'm going to fill it with the objects. But I can already run this, and you'll see that our h1 tag appears here. It's not doing the loop because, again, it's empty, but it's starting to look like something. So we can then fill our snapshots variable, and to do that, we define a grid helper, or a template helper on the grid template. So just to go back a little, Meteor doesn't have like MVC organization or anything like that, so it's kind of up to you to define your own architecture for your files and for your app. So the way I like to do it is put every template in its own file. So if it's a template named grid, put it in grid.html, and then have kind of it's kind of a controller, but not really a controller. I like to call it a mapper in a .js file of the same name that will map the objects used in a template to their data. So in this case, we have a snapshots helper for the grid template, and that helper is just going to return the result of snapshots.find. Finding an empty object will just find everything in the database. We sort by timestamp, and we'll limit to 12. So let's give it a try. So the timestamps are Unix timestamps, so they're really long, so that's why they're all jumbled, but we can already see that it's spinning up data from the database and displaying it. So the next step will be having a second loop. So we have a loop for the columns, and now we have a second loop for the rows. So we have two embedded loops. So we didn't really see that, but when I queried the Dribble API, it gave me the list of all the images on the homepage, and that list is accessible at here data.shots. So for each snapshot, I can just loop over that data.shots object and then display the title. So we don't want to just display the title, we want to display the image, right? So we'll create another template called shot, which is just going to contain a link and an image. And now once we've defined a template and included it in our second embedded loop, let's see what we get. Here you go, we get our homepage or grid with the 12 by 12 grid of the Dribble homepage. And that's about it for the first part. I mean, it's not that much code, and hopefully you've been able to follow along, but we already have something that does something. So it's pretty cool. So a question you might have is, okay, this is cool, but at this point anybody can just come along to our site and do like a snapshots.remove and wipe our database. So that's not really ideal. Thankfully, Meteor has some tools to prevent that, and that's going to be the topic of the next part. So the reason why I was able to build this app really in a really simple manner so far without worrying about that security aspect is because of those two packages which are included by default. So auto-publish and insecure. So yeah, you probably don't want to have the insecure package running on your app. Let's see what happens when I remove them. All our data is gone. So remember when I said Meteor mirrors a copy of the database from the server to the client? Well, what auto-publish does is it automatically mirrors the whole thing, right? So it takes all the data in the database, even if there's like 1 million records, and puts all of that on the client. And this is kind of something the Meteor guys did to make it very easy to get started. When you don't, when you're prototyping, you don't worry about that. But once you remove it, you then need to define all that layer of publishing and subscribing manually. So that's what we're going to do. And insecure, this is the package that lets you insert or remove or modify data from the client. So in our case, we are only ever adding data from the server with our interval loop. So we don't even need to worry about that aspect. So anyway, we need to get our data back from the server to the client. So the first step to do that is through what's called a publication. And a Meteor publication is a way Meteor has of telling clients what part of the data is available to them. So to take an example, if I have a more complex app with users, posts, comments, for example, like a blog, I could decide to publish the post and the user and the comments, but maybe not if I have a documents collection. I can decide not to publish it, and if I don't publish it, there is no way anybody can access that data from a client. in our case, I do want to publish it, but I want to put some limits on what I publish. Because once our app will have been running for a couple weeks or months, obviously there will be a lot of data in our database, so I can just push everything to the client. So that's what I'm doing here with that limit parameter. That publication takes a limit and limits the number of records it returns to that number. The second part of that puzzle is on the client, is the subscription. So if the publication tells what's available to the client, and the subscription is the client's way of telling the server what it wants out of all that available data. So in our case, we want to subscribe to the snapshots publication, and we want to pass 12 as a parameter because we want 12 documents. Right?
Sorry, before you said that the client directory runs only on client, and the server runs only on server, and everything else runs on both.
Yeah.
There must are there these reflected? I mean, if I put in the client something that I want to run on the server, like a JavaScript exploit, for example, does it?
So in this case, you would not put it in the client directory. You would put it, for example, in the lib directory or something else. And it can be useful for libraries like Moment.js for date manipulation, for example. You can share the same library on both environments.
No, what I meant is that can someone from the client, let's say, add the JavaScript code that will be executed on the server?
Oh, sorry. No, you can't add code. Like you can inject code, if that's what you mean. What you can do is inject data into the database from the client, so that the data can go back and forth from the server to the client. But
I saw you executed the JavaScript command on the console of the client, and it ran on the server. So.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what happens, actually, it runs on the client, but because of the reactivity, the changes get replicated on the server. So I'm never running code on the server from the client. I'm running code on the client, and that code triggers changes on the server, if that makes sense. So
yes, but also the contents of the directories are reflected. So if I put something on the client, it will be reflected on the server.
No. If you remember, we have the /client and /server. So those two directories are not reflected.
But everything else?
Everything else is.
Uh-oh.
Well, yeah, maybe I'm not.
You can't add files to the server through the client. It's just not possible.
Well, let me go.
Okay.
Go on for now, and then we'll come back to that later if we have time. So, where was I? Yeah. Now that we have our subscription, let's run the code, and our images came back. Because the server is telling the client what it can get, and the client is telling the server what it wants. Okay, so how are we for time?
10 more minutes.
Brain power, are you okay? So if we have more time, I want to show you a few more things we can do here. Getting fancy. So if you remember when I showed you like the original finished product app, there was a zoom when you hover over each image. So to do that, I'm going to start by setting up events on the hover and hover in and hover out, or mouse enter, mouse leave. And Meteor makes it very easy because it has this events thing where you don't need to use jQuery or anything, although you could, but you can just define events like this. So what I'm going to do is on mouse enter. So for example, when I do this, I'm going to define a session variable, and the value of that session variable is going to be this. And in this case, this is the object that the template is being called on. So it's basically the data behind each of those images. And the session variable, by the way, is also reactive. What that means is anything in my app that calls a session variable will get updated whenever that session variable changes. So let's see. We can actually test that out easily. Okay, so if I get the value of my session variable now, the value is UI refresh, which is one of the images. If I go here, though, you can see it changes, changed, change, and if I go out, null, so on. So even though we're not like using that session variable in our UI or yet, you can already see that it's working as it should. So moving on, we'll need a template to display that zoomed up image. And that template, what it will do is include the shot template. So if you remember, the shot template is basically each of those like boxes is the shot template being included. And what we're going to do is include that shot template again, but this time we're going to pass it a data context. So this is what we're doing here with the syntax shot, zoomed shot. So we're calling that template on the zoomed shot object. Instead of just, before we were just getting the data context from the loop. I didn't really explain that very well, but basically the loop was telling the template what to show, and now we're telling it manually to show the zoomed shot object. So all that's left is define that zoomed shot helper, which we'll set to the session variable. And yeah, sorry, we also need to include that template, because otherwise it won't display. So once we do that, so as you can see, every time I hover on an image here, it sets that session variable to a new value. And that value is picked up by the zoom template, which is how we end up with the zoom here. What's really cool is that when the session variable goes to null, for example, if I go out, I'm not on a shot, the zoom template is called, or the shot template rather, is called on null, which means it just doesn't display anything and it disappears. So it does exactly what we want. We'll do one more thing, which is add a parameter, or rather a second parameter to the publication. So we already had the limit parameter, right, to limit the number of items we return to 12. We'll add a skip parameter, which what it does is offset the items we return in the database. So instead of returning always the first 12, we can return the offset by 1, 2, and so on. We will also add that parameter to the subscription. So the subscription is the part that tells the server what it wants, right? So we're going to add that and add it as a session variable. The reason we're doing that is since session variables are reactive, we'll have a... Is this working or not? Okay, this is part of the things that don't work, apparently. But if it did work, you would see the grid just offset itself instantly, because the session variable being reactive, any change gets picked up instantly. Anyway, next time maybe. And before leaving you, we'll do one more thing, which is add a loading screen. So really simple. I have this div which has a bunch of CSS on it to show an animation. And all I'll do is hide it once my subscription is loaded. In other words, hide it once all the data I want is loaded. And there you go. So I do that with like a callback on the subscribe function. And you'll notice I'm using a jQuery because the jQuery is included by default in Meteor. Like you can remove it if you don't like jQuery for some reason, but it's still pretty convenient that you can do like DOM manipulation very easily like this. So there you go. Like I counted, and this app is 78 lines of code. I mean, it doesn't do a ton, but when you really think about it, if you wanted to build all of that from scratch, it would be a lot more than that, especially if you add in the reactive real-time aspect. So I hope you enjoyed this and it made you a bit curious about Meteor. If you want to learn more, there's a few resources. So I actually wrote a book about Meteor called Discover Meteor, but there's a few other good sites too. And yeah, thanks for listening, and let me know if you have any questions or want to learn more.
Thank you. Maybe if you have any questions, could you wait after we are done with the other presentations?
Go ahead.
Because we need to go and...
Or just buy my book.
When's you to actually do the presentation?
Oh, okay. It's called Reveal.
Okay.
Maybe I can talk about that very quickly, just 2 minutes. So, Reveal is the part on the left. And on the right, I'm using an iframe to display the Meteor app itself.
Oh, okay.
And every time I click the run button, it changes the commit, like the git commit of the repository. And since Meteor tracks the changes, it reloads the app automatically. And like I just built a really simple like Ruby app that listens for URL and then runs some bash code to change the commits.
So the screen split is built into Reveal? Or
No, I customized that.
Okay.
Very cool.
Thank you again, Sasha.